So, John Lennon, he's in this band called the Quarrymen, and he meets Paul McCartney for the first time after one of his shows. And Paul liked what they did, so he asked to join the band. He's like, yeah, but you have to play a song. He played the song. He's like, yeah, I like that song, you can join. Then Paul brought his friend George Harrison to one of the shows. He's like, yeah, I want to join. But John was like, nah, he's too young. Then eventually he made him the lead guitarist of the band. Then they added Stuart Sutcliffe on bass. Then they went through different name changes, and finally they settled on the Beatles. Then they played some shows in Hamburg, but they needed a drummer, so they got Pete Best. Then one day, Brian Epstein decided to go to one of their shows, and he really liked them, so he asked to be their manager, and they said yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to say this. Stewart left, then he also died. Then they went to record labels and got rejected by every single one. Except for EMI, because George Martin liked them. But George Martin didn't really like Pete Best as a drummer, so they just fired him. Then they got the Ringo, the Ringist. Yes, very nice. Yeah. Then they recorded their first song, Love Me Do. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's kind of boring though, but like, still good. Then in one day, they recorded their first album, Please Please Me. Yeah, this album is very great. And yeah, this album stayed at number 1 for a very long time. Then it got replaced by their next album, Beatlemania. Woo! Then they recorded their second album with the Beatles. At least they didn't have to do it all in one day, because that would suck. Even though this album is worse. And with this album, Beatlemania went higher. It got bigger. But the United States, they were just not having it. Like, who are these bugs? But then they released I Want to Hold Your Hand, and it became their first number 1 hit in America. Wahoo! Then they went on the Ed Sullivan Show, which their popularity grew in America. Like, it grew. Then United Artists went to the Beatles and said, hey, you want to do 3 movies? They're like, yeah. So they recorded a soundtrack album called A Hard Day's Night. And of course it hit number 1. And they paired it up with the movie that they did. Yeah, the movie's pretty good. Better than the album. Then they toured. And on that tour, they met Bob Dylan, which was very historic in music history. But he also introduced them to weed. But they didn't really do anything with it at the time in their music, but they did in later years. Then they recorded and released Beatles for Sale. Yeah, kind of like 5. Then one day in 1965, John and George and their partners were with George's dentist, and he added LSD to their coffee. Wow! Then in June of that year, Queen Elizabeth knighted everyone in the band. People didn't really like that though, I don't know why. Then they decided to make another movie called Help! And also their new album was the soundtrack. These aren't really soundtracks, they're just songs from the movie. And this album was their most acclaimed album yet. Till their next album. We'll get to that next video. Goodbye.